Hey, YouTube. Good morning. This is another Cirucci Team Brief here on June 26th, 2019. You have me, George, and Johnny here this afternoon. We were just having some great discussion before we immediately went live, so we'll jump right into it. We were mentioning a bit about the Mueller report, Bob Mueller, the whole craze of the Mueller report. It's been used in the media for the as like a gaslighting device for the last 2 years, just to confuse and mislead people. But just with Mueller, people don't know he was the former director of the FBI, and I'm going to link this in the chat. But I don't know how long this tradition has been going on, but under Bob Mueller's directorship of the FBI began to go to Jesuit Fordham University every single year for their quote international conference on cybersecurity. So this FBI International Conference on Cybersecurity is always at Fordham University. But in 2010, Bob Mueller attended Fordham. And you can see photos of Bob Mueller with Jesuit Fordham trustee Mark Toohey up above. And you can also see at the very bottom of the article, you can see a photo of Bob Mueller with like probably 15 or 20 Jesuit Fordham University students. And also the Jesuit Joseph McShane is here also, and he's so I'll link this story in the chat so people can see this. But Bob Mueller, he had no credibility. For if you're well informed, like Bob Mueller back in 2005 testified before Congress saying like 100% Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Without a doubt. So, he had no credibility to begin with. But Bob Mueller was connected to Fordham here while he was director of the FBI. And the whole thing was a smokescreen. George, you mentioned how one of Mueller's aides went to Georgetown as well.
No, his wife did. Rod Rosenstein.
Oh,
and of course, Rosenstein is Jewish, so he's like the perfect patsy, if you will.
Okay. What was the name of that Rosenstein? I put in the wrong Rosenstein on Wikipedia. I put in Rod Rosenstein. What was the wife's?
Here, I'll go pull it up. I'm trying to multitask because if I'm only on my tablet right now. So it's like the model that came out before this was made out of stone. So,
yeah, George, is that's aide of his. He wouldn't happen to be Jewish, would he? Rod Rosenstein?
Well, you'd have to talk to his rabbi about that.
Yeah. And so is his wife Jewish also? She'd be another great example of a Jesuit-educated Jew. Meanwhile, supposedly it's the Jews that control everything, right?
Well, actually, his wife's name is Lisa Barzumnian. She's Armenian. So, but she actually went to, where did Lisa go to school? Yeah. Rod J. Rosenstein is an American attorney who served as a U.S. Deputy Attorney General from 2017 to 2019. He's married, as I said, to Lisa. Now, Rosenstein got his undergraduate.
Was it Rod Rosenstein's wife who went to Georgetown?
Yes. Now, Rosenstein he went to Harvard Law School and to University of Pennsylvania for his undergrad degree. So he was the deputy director of the FBI under James Comey.
James Comey is a Roman Catholic. I put this in the article I did on the FBI. The first place where Comey went after he left the FBI was a Catholic church.
Yes. Now,
that's interesting because Comey, nobody knows that Comey was a secret. Actually, everybody's making a big deal about how Comey was just a good Protestant. Now, I had that from his youth there in New Jersey, that he was a good Catholic boy. But everybody was making such a big deal about how he was actually a Protestant. So good find, Eric. I'm sorry, George. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay, Lisa Bazumian, or however you say her name, Barazumian, she went to law school at Georgetown. So she actually, as I said, is Armenian and grew up Armenian Eastern Orthodox. But she married Rod Rosenstein, who's Reformed Jewish. His background is secular. He went to Harvard Law School and the University of Pennsylvania for his undergrad degree.
Whoa, 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 whoa. So it's secular because he went to the private University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we have seen evidence that the University of Pennsylvania is controlled incognito by the Jesuits. So we'll go ahead and add Rod Rosenstein to the very unusually prestigious list of alumni from the University of Pennsylvania to include our partially Jesuit trained WWE pedophile president. So my point, George, is for the audience, don't just run over. Whenever we hit University of Pennsylvania, we always want to mention how our buddy Veritas Aquitas, who I think is probably an incognito priest himself, playing the Eric John Phelps game on Reddit, has that great post about how the University of Pennsylvania is controlled by the Jesuits, and I absolutely agree. It almost certainly is.
Yeah, actually, I have the guy's name here. One of that connection was one of the major donors to the school. Well, the whole Annenberg family are big donors, but Walter Annenberg was a huge donor to the University of Pennsylvania. He was the U.S. ambassador to the U.K. But this papal court Jew was a knight of Saint Gregory the Great.
What a surprise!
Actually, in the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania is named after this guy.
Great find. Well, yeah, really just. Go ahead, George. I just want to say how again we have all this evidence that really just adds to this accusation. We'll call it an accusation. Really gives credence to this accusation that the University of Pennsylvania is secretly controlled by the Jesuits. I think there's something to it, George.
Veritas, I agree. Just I would agree with the take that he's an insider, just from my experience with him being banned from his website over the posting about the Jesuit connections to Sir Francis Bacon. But occasionally he gives out really good information, like the University of Pennsylvania stuff. But one thing I've learned from his site was that Felix this is a Russian name, sorry if I'm botching this. Felix Dzerzhinsky. He was the first head of the Czech police. But I found through it, he said Veritas made the claim that Dzerzhinsky was wanted to be a Jesuit priest growing up. But I found this on the website History Learning site, and it's true. Dzerzhinsky grew up Roman Catholic and wanted to become a Jesuit.
Absolutely. Dzerzhinsky was Polish. Another example of how when Rome wants to punish her enemies, she gets someone that wasn't born there. Are you kidding me? So the premier chief of the Soviet secret police was not Russian, just like Stalin was not Russian.
Actually, Stalin's chief of police wasn't Russian, Lamente Bereya. And Bereya was like a serial rapist as well, it turned out to be. But, the Dzerzhinsky, that's just, it's incredible. It shows that they stick to this pattern all the time by bringing in a foreigner to run the key positions.
Absolutely.
And the Soviet Union was a Jesuit experiment. Like, you have Dzerzhinsky, like their head of their chief police, literally wanted to become a Jesuit priest, Polish Roman Catholic, and people got to realize there's a reason why Vladimir Lenin thought it was suitable to build a monument to the Roman Catholic Sir Thomas More. Like, what's the Soviet Union doing building a monument to Roman Catholic Sir Thomas More, the utopiast? And, Sir Thomas More, people don't know, had a grandson who was the provincial of the Jesuits in England, Father Henry More, S.J. And, George, if we want to segue into this, I know George mentioned to me you want to talk about this a little bit, but the Huguenot massacre over in Florida, because the source for this for Henry Moore is in the article on my archive page, Lord Baltimore's feud with the Jesuits. But Henry Moore, S.J., was referring to all the Protestants in North America in 1630 as heretics at this time, and saying like they need to be punished, essentially, like calling them heretics.
Thomas More was also a pretty good inquisitor. One of the greatest reformers in all of England was William Tyndale, who was a Roman Catholic priest who broke with the church in order to translate the Bible into English, and he was chased from the country and hid in Europe. And it was Thomas More that helped get him betrayed and executed under so-called Protestant Henry VIII. So he was a good inquisitor.
Lauded so much. There's St. Thomas More societies everywhere, like literally everywhere. Like, you know, he's the patron saint of lawyers.
It tells you everything. That tells you everything.
And like he was made patron saint, Johnny, at like the height of fascism and communist tyranny. Like he had Jesuit trained Stalin in the Soviet Russia in 1936. He had Jesuit puppet Adolf Hitler in Germany in 1936. He had Jesuit puppet Franco in Spain in 1936. You know, Mussolini in 1936. Like they took like the time in history where it was like the most fascist time you could say in like the history of like the modern world, and they made St. Thomas More. That's the time they decided to make St. Thomas More the patron saint.
And we can't forget our boy Anti Stefano was it Pavlovich?
Absolutely, George. And you know, George brilliantly found. You saw this, Johnny, that Pavlovich actually went to a Jesuit. What was it, like a Jesuit boarding school or Jesuit periarchical school growing up?
Well, yes, he was trained. There says this on his Wikipedia page. He was trained by the Jesuits as a kid. You know, I think they probably gave birth to him, and he was just like, he had a priest, you know, had a bottle to his mouth and said, "Okay, Auntie, we're going to teach you before you learn how to read and write. We're going to teach you Ignatian spirituality. Okay, go gaga. Oh, okay." Ends justify the means, you know, however he say it in Croatian. Gugu gaga, divide and conquer. Gugu gaga, you know, all these.
Something must have been like that because like, he was groomed like from literally like day one. You know, everyone around Pavlovich was Jesuit trained too. You know, Stepniak, people don't know, was trained by the Jesuits at the Gregorian University, and also Kunislav Draganovich was also trained by the Jesuits. The Jasenovic chaplain at the concentration camp, and just Draganovich is an absolute huge name that comes up with the Vatican rat lines. Like you can't really understand the Vatican, at least the Eustachi element of it. Like it was actually Draganovich who got Roman Catholic Nazi Klaus Barbie outside of Europe. And like the Draganovich, like his name was omitted in Alan Ryan's official U.S. government report on Klaus Barbie, which said the CIA had nothing to do with Klaus Barbie. Don't worry. And Alan Ryan then became professor at Jesuit Boston College after that report. Right. But you know, keep going, George. I just want to mention Pavlovich was like there was like an army of Jesuit trained people around Pavlovich.
Well, you know, you were talking about the Huguenot massacre. What is now Florida? What is now Jacksonville? I think they call it Port Caroline in French. You're talking the 1560s, so almost 500 years ago, 40 or 50 years ago. And basically, I mentioned this to Johnny the other day. Basically, this whole encamp. So this is like more than 50 years before Jamestown, up in was it Virginia or something? So you're talking before the English had moved into what is now America or the American colonies. And this Huguenot colony has been basically obliterated from history. I just found out about this a week ago. And Rome is notorious for doing that. What they'll do one of several things. They'll make whole people groups disappear or they'll minimize them. For example, I wasn't going to bring this up, but back 20 years ago when I was going to my local community college, I was doing a paper on Martin Luther, and this is actually before I'd taken my one of my red pills. And I was always been impressed with him, but I didn't know much about him, so I decided to read everything I could in old-fashioned print books. So when I was preparing my paper, I was asking some classmates, just because we all had to do papers on a certain topic. And since this was back in the 1990s, we had to say, well, whom do you think was the most important person of the second millennium, from the year 1001 and up until almost the year 2000? And I decided to do a paper on Martin Luther. So I asked some of my classmates, do you know who Martin Luther was? And invariably they all said, oh, do you mean the civil rights leader? Um, And my response was, well, this one was a little bit had less of a tan, um, and he. So most people, okay, when you're into Martin Luther, and I'm not saying that of veneration or anything like that, have no idea who he was. Those who do know about him said, "Oh yeah, wasn't he this religious figure who lived hundreds of years ago, who had a problem with the Catholic Church?" And then maybe you'll get a few more people that say, "Oh yeah, he had problems with Rome because of indulgences, and he was paranoid about his salvation." And but they had really no idea who Martin Luther was, the man. And granted, he was flawed. He made a number of mistakes. So this is the level. I hope things are better in Canada because this is the level of education in
Well, George,
America,
you know what? I've
and people
actually had the
just
exact same experience. I've said, "Hey, do you know who Martin Luther is?" And they say Martin Luther King, and there's no there's no
oh,
connection to the original Martin Luther. When they say Martin Luther, they assume you're talking about Martin Luther King. That's here in
uh,
Canada also. That's not just an American thing.
well, okay, and of course, if people don't know who Martin Luther is, they'll say, okay, some people might have heard of John Calvin, and they said, oh yeah, didn't God? Yeah, he was that guy, 500 years ago in Switzerland, who said, God determines if you're going to go to hell or go to heaven before you're born. So why bother trying? So that is the extent of people's knowledge of Calvin, and forget about any of these other figures like Huss or Wycliffe or fill in the blank. We have been in America. We have been so incredibly dumbed down. It's yeah. This is not supposed to be a rant. This is supposed to be educational. Um, so people just don't know basic facts.
Well,
People
absolutely. If you
just
think
don't. I
about
mean,
it, there's been many Catholic authors too that have come out and have exposed the Vatican, like the whole Danish strife, for instance. That was an internal Catholic movement, where like the Jainists, where they wanted essentially to ban the Jesuits and like to have serious political reform within the Catholic Church. They were viciously suppressed though. Like they were
Yeah, and
persecuted. They were persecuted like the Huguenots were persecuted, for instance. But like and like for instance, like there were many. I know like there were many Catholic authors and theologians who disagreed with the Jesuits when they made it in 1954. They turned the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary into heaven, or they made the infallibility of the Virgin Mary. I know a lot of Catholic. Uh, Most people, Catholics and non-Catholics, are unaware of this history, but many priests have dissented from the official line. They're just not talked about. Like, I could pull this up later in the show. Like, the I think Saint Catherine of Siena called like the Roman Catholic hierarchy like wicked devils, for instance. Peter J. Doiswick quoted some text from certain Catholic saints and martyrs of these Catholic martyrs just ripping into the Pope for like some of them called Pope like the Pope the Antichrist, like Saint Bridget of Sweden. I'll pull that up here. It's just it's important to know the Protestant history, but there's been numerous Catholic authors that have been buried uh, within the pages of history with their resistance to the Vatican also.
yeah, whenever Rome wants to eradicate an enemy, they suddenly become um, heretics for all Christianity. Manichaeans, Jansenists, they just sort of fabricate any ridiculous, remotely anti-Christian, anti-biblical excuse, and that's all they need to wipe them out. The Albigenses, the Valdenses, and sometimes the heresies are like, what? That's the heresy. Like Manichaeanism is supposedly on heresy on the duality of the nature of Jesus, and it's not even clear what exactly this so-called heresy is. And meanwhile, these are people that were viciously wiped out for things that, for so-called heresies where you don't even understand what the heresy is.
Well, you see, you're talking about the Albigenses, for example, and there are numerous other groups: the Paulicians, the Bogomil or Bogomiles. I mean, and probably others I've never even heard of. I mean, just talking about specifically the Albigenses. Allegedly, okay, Rome will say two things about them. They flourished in southern France about 800 years ago, early 13th century, and they were allegedly Manichaeans, as you said, in Cathari, which means to purge or to cleanse or to purify. So you could say they were the prototypes to the Puritans. And allegedly, as Johnny just said, they were dualists, they were part Gnostic, and they're a hodgepodge of several other different religious and philosophical beliefs. They allegedly took a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of Zoroastrianism, a little bit of Christianity, Judaism, Greek philosophy, and this created this blend. So allegedly, the Albigenses believed the spirit was good and the flesh was bad. Therefore, sex, even inside the confines of marriage, was intrinsically evil. So they advocated celibacy, i.e., rejecting marriage, and they were vegetarians or vegans or things like that, and they allegedly, according to Rome, the greatest good you could possibly do would be to kill yourself. Well, they sent the inquisitors, originally the Dominicans, who were as we've said before, were basically the forerunners to the Jesuits. They sent the Dominicans to torture them and to destroy their writings, all their ancillary writings, their Bibles, their commentaries, their confessions of faith. The Albigenses actually had a catechism. We know this because despite Rome's best effort, some of their writings did survive, and they ended up hooking up with the Waldenses in Italy, and some of them ended up going to England to basically form what would later become the Lollard movement in England. And they had a big impact on John Wycliffe and later on Jan Hus. But anyhow, so you have Rome. It's the cliche: the victors write the history, and when you this is something we've talked about before with modern law enforcement. Rome historically has gone in and destroyed the scene. They've tampered with evidence. So you could say they pulled a Waco on the Albigenses, or you could say they could have pulled a Jeffrey Dahmer apartment building on the Albigenses. They basically destroyed everything, or almost everything. And if you're being tortured for hours on end or days on end,
they made sure to destroy all the evidence of the concentration camps in Ustashi, Catholic Croatia during World War II. They poured concrete over the majority of the concentration camps.
So anyhow, but something I'll say is Rome, whether you're talking about what happened in Florida, 40 and 50 years ago, or the Albigenses in the 13th century, or the Huguenots in France later on, is they'll spin, and spin. They'll say, no, that was not the Catholic Church doing that. It was the secular authorities. We were just also the punishment wasn't that bad. You're not talking millions or tens of millions. You're only talking thousands or maybe tens of thousands over the course of centuries. And of course, that these people who did suffer and die, they deserved it. So they cut. Rome always, her apologists have come out for centuries with these cover ups. But the biggest way she covers things up is to make the incident disappear or to minimize it. And that is exactly what's going on right now.
Well, George,
So
just
we talked
really quickly, George. That's why I mentioned just the concrete in Croatia, because think about all the young Croatians will be completely disconnected from those atrocities and massacres, because all the sites like are gone. Like they've even put like housing developments over some of the old concentration camps, but all of them have been sealed up, and like the structures that were up were knocked down as well. So there's just like no there's just no connection whatsoever. And Croatia, to this day remains like 90% Catholic. Their president in like the 1990s blamed the massacres on the Jews, for instance. So you can see how all this leads to the population just being completely ignorant of the history.
I'll tell you, we were asking so many questions in the 90s as to what the hell was the United States and the United Nations doing getting involved in Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia. I wish I had my Jesuit red pill then, because it's so incredibly obvious. You've got the handmaid of the Jesuits in Bill Clinton, the bastard child of a Rockefeller pervert deviant, completely owned and controlled, mentored and tutored by Jesuits. Jesuits like Dick McSorley, far left, the hippie communist Jesuit, giving Bill Clinton his tour. Go ahead, George.
Gotti, please don't use that language on this program. We may have kids.
What, far left?
You're talking about Richard McSorley. I'm sorry. Please.
No, that's his nickname, Dick. Yeah.
Well, you guys, speaking of strong language, I thought this was crazy. Emperor Frederick II. We'll go back here to Yugoslavia if you want, Johnny. I just wanted to mention this, just about the suppression of history when George to add on to what George was saying a bit earlier. But Emperor Frederick II, he died in 1250. But he had a famous feud with several popes. Like he was famously excommunicated because he didn't recognize the temporal authority of the Pope. But Frederick the Great, this is what he calls the Pope. Like he literally calls him the Antichrist. This was Frederick the Great, was like the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, like the German Empire. But he says here, the Pope is a Pharisee anointed with the oil of iniquity who excites the whole world to scandal. He is the great dragon, means the Latin Draco Magnus, who has seduced the whole world. He is the Antichrist. Another Balaam, the head of the princes of darkness. He is the angel that came out of the pit. This is pretty strong language from Emperor Frederick II. He says here, the same emperor called the cardinals, quote, "Ye sons of Belial, Satan, the prince of discord, sits in your midst." That's what Emperor, and the quote for that is erroneous.
I wish he wouldn't have equivocated and been such a fence sitter. I wish he would have just told people what he really felt.
Yeah,
good for him. That was a poor attempt at a joke. Good for him. That's pretty clear. And your point is well taken. Here you're talking about a Holy Roman Emperor who sounds like a protester, Protestant, calling the Pope and the office of the papacy Antichrist, which is exactly what we've understood it to be. And interestingly enough, I just finished a chapter on my upcoming book on the historical Dracula, and the reason why we call him Vlad the Impaler of Wallachia, the reason why we call him Dracula is that's Romanian for son of the dragon, because his father, Vlad II, was a Catholic crusader who was enrolled in the Order of the Dragon, and Dracula means son of the dragon, and the dragon is a Roman Catholic crusader knighthood. So the historical Dracula, who was a vicious monster, impaled thousands of human beings in horrible ways. Impaling is horrible as enough, and found ways to make it last even longer. The historical Dracula was a Roman Catholic crusader. convert from his Romanian Orthodoxy. Married into the Roman Catholic Hungarian family. Vicious, sick, twisted monster. Go ahead, George.
Okay, well,
very fitting. Just that's for the Inquisition, and Vlad. That's probably some of the vicious torture tactics where they were probably sharing ideas between the two. And just to make sure I heard that properly, Johnny, did you say Vlad the Impaler's father was a crusader, or his grandfather?
Both were. Vlad the Impaler's father, Vlad II, was enrolled in the Order of the Dragon, which is a Hungarian Roman Catholic knighthood. Vlad the Impaler was Vlad III. He inherited the knighthood, and he inherited his father's Catholicism, and he himself made active conversion to the Catholic faith. He also was a crusader against the Ottoman Turks on behalf of the papacy.
Oh, that's incredible.
He died a Roman Catholic. He married into the Catholic Hungarians, married the cousin of the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus, I believe it was. So, yeah, getting all into this for the 4th chapter of my upcoming 4th book. So.
Oh, that's fantastic information. Holy cow. Yeah, because Vlad the Impaler, he's one of, I've seen photos of the people impaled, it was absolutely ruthless.
Just evil. Absolutely evil. I guarantee you that he and the Inquisition exchanged notes. Absolutely evil. Found ways to not just impale human beings, but to make it last so that their torture would carry on and they would not die right away. Found ways to put them on a stake so that there would not be an excess of internal bleeding, and they'd have to sit and endure it for hours, maybe even days. Absolute monster. An absolute monster that had the blessings of the Catholic Church the entire time. Was eventually assassinated by the friggin' Muslims. The Muslims had to do this guy in.
I'll have to look into this history. Was this like the Mughal Empire that took him out, or is this just like the Ottomans?
It was the Ottomans. It was the Ottomans that but eventually put contract out on him. But it was also the Ottomans that turned him into a monster. He was sent as a captive by his father, who was another viciously ambitious tyrant, who gave the Ottomans 2 of his sons, Radu and Vlad III, as captives in order that the Ottomans would have a partnership and alliance with him so that he could stay on the throne. And while he was a captive, he eventually rebelled too much, and they tortured and sexually abused him. And this is where he was obsessed. This is how he got obsessed. He obviously was violated himself. He saw the Ottomans impaling their prisoners, and he became absolutely twisted and obsessed with violation and impalement. His brother just gave in. His brother, Radu, actually became the homosexual lover of the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II. He resisted and was imprisoned and forcibly violated, and this is what brought about his lifetime of sick, twisted torture by impalement.
Fantastic. It makes perfect sense. You'd have to endure some serious psychological trauma to get to that sadistic level where there's some photos on the internet. People haven't seen them. Like, it's some crazy stuff. And the Inquisition, I'll use similar tactics. I know the Inquisition would peel people's skin off slowly.
Yes.
And
that's unbelievable.
That's a very Vlad-esque tactic of having the victim endure as much pain as possible for the longest amount of time. And I know, George, you can jump in here. If people don't know this, a modern day technique that originates with the Inquisition that you can actually see photos of online is waterboarding. If people don't know that, that's an
Well,
Inquisition origin. The photos, I think it was from the Spanish Inquisition. The photos on the internet, but you can see a guy being waterboarded back in the
And
1600s.
specifically, George, before you jump in, George, specifically what that is derived from is originally Inquisition-style waterboarding was to put the cloth over the victim's mouth and then pour water into the victim's body, and the cloth was very rough, and the cloth would get lodged in their throat, and then you'd rip the cloth out. This was part of some sort of twisted satanic psyop where the inquisitors convinced themselves that as long as they didn't draw over blood, they were still within their rights to do whatever they wanted to. That only worked some of the time because, as you said, other victims were just had their skin ripped out, their intestines ripped out while they were alive.
That could easily cause internal bleeding, easily.
Yeah, so that's so that was the outpouring that eventually became the secular CIA that has nothing to do with the Vatican. That's how they lit upon waterboarding, which is, my understanding is, a derivative of which is to pour water over a rag over top the nose and mouth to give the person a never-ending sense of drowning without actually drowning. Good stuff. All from the Inquisition. No less than Abu Ghraib. From waterboarding to Abu Ghraib, people point the finger at the United States as being a criminal country, and meanwhile, it's the fact that the United States is ruled by a massive malignant parasite who has traitors and insurgents controlling everything.
Well, it was Abu Ghraib or Fallujah. I know General James Mattis was one of the head commanders there. Was he not? Like the current defense. Mattis is I think he's one of Trump's chief military advisors.
Whoa! Are you talking about the warrior priest who is our current Secretary of War?
Oh, he's the war secretary. Actually, yeah, great
yes.
point. Yeah, he's known as the warrior monk or the warrior priest. Yeah,
that's because he's another pervert deviant. Spent his entire life and was never married. But I'm sure he's heterosexual. I'm sure he's heterosexual. It's just a coincidence.
Well, no,
go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to mention. I'm pretty sure he was serving in Fallujah and Abu Ghraib alongside Dunford. I know is involved with both of those.
Oh, Jesuit Edgen. I've said this before. It's amazing that you have these military traitor scumbags. They actually have to step out of their military careers to get their Jesuit education, like Dunford, like that piece of shit. Pardon my language. That piece of shit traitor Dunford, United States Marine Corps piece of shit traitor. They have their own military schools they're supposed to be going to. They skip out of their normal military education in order to go, like Dunford did, to Georgetown. As did, in fact, I think his predecessor, Martin Dempsey, also. Right?
Or what they'll
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs
do is, well, yes, Dempsey, I believe he did good at Georgia. What they'll do is...
You know what, George? I'm sorry, George. Dempsey was just Irish Roman Catholic. I don't know that he actually went to Georgetown. He checked the box because he was born and raised Irish Roman Catholic.
Okay, well, what they'll do is they'll send their generals or admirals to West Point or to Annapolis to get their undergrad degree. And what they'll often do is they'll go back to a place like Georgetown to get a master's. Or what they'll do is they will go to West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy to get the degree, but they'll go to a place like Georgetown Prep beforehand. And if they don't, they'll send their kids to places like Georgetown Prep or University of San Francisco or something like that. Or when they retire, they'll become an adjunct instructor at Fordham or Boston College or something like that.
Well, actually, George, and they'll join the boards of directors at these Jesuit schools. Like, just really quickly, the former, I think this guy's a 4-star general, George W. Casey Jr., former United States Army. Right now, George, a lot of these generals create their own like hedge fund firms, and like they join the boards of defense contractors. But Jesuit-trained George Casey Jr. became the president and CEO of the Minnow Group LLC, and he's currently on the board at Georgetown University.
Yeah, I want to know how these generals, these guys that are supposedly public servants, end up being multi-million. I think Mathis is also a multi-millionaire. Are you freaking kidding me? No different than Trump's papist sister Judgette, who has $5 million laying around to give to a Jesuit school. How are these public servants? I tell you how. Unbelievable papist corruption. Unbelievable papist corruption. You have a general. It's bad enough that these piece of shit generals have all these perks and privileges. They're also multimillionaires. Are you kidding me?
Oh, it's incredible. It's a serious problem in the United States right now. The amount of ex high-powered generals, the Jesuit-trained generals, and even just all generals who join the force, like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. It's a serious problem, and it keeps the never-ending cycle of war. Constantly, we need more war, and right now with the Jesuits going the route of militarizing the police, there's this new increasing demand of military equipment that needs to go to the cops as well. As you know,
That's it right there. How is it that they're multi-millionaires, even though they're public servants? They're part and parcel to the police state. They're making money off of the police state.
And what they'll also do is they'll write books, or they'll usually have somebody else write. They'll ghostwrite books, or they'll publish their memoirs, or they'll become consultants on television on, CNN, Fox News, whatever the case. For a long time, Oliver North was a consultant on, was it Fox News or something? And North had written a couple of books over the years, or has probably ghostwritten. Same thing with Norman Schwarzkopf. Now, if I could just mention something a little bit off topic, when Schwarzkopf retired in 1992, his salary as a 4-star general was something like $100,000 back then. So since he had 30 years in, he got 3/4 of that, or $75,000. And he apparently made a comment back then. And he said, "Well, I can't survive on $75,000 a year in 1992, which would probably be more like $100,000 a year now." So he had to, rather than getting a job as a dishwasher or a greeter at Walmart, he started working for, I guess, CNN as a commentator, things like that. And of course, he publishes his memoirs. And not trying to denigrate Norm, $75,000 a year in the early 1990s, that was pocket change. I mean, how are you supposed to entertain royalty and prime ministers from other countries? I mean, do you know how expensive champagne and caviar are?
Love it, George. Absolutely love it. They are royalty. The mere fact that you have
politicians, really quick, politicians are their primary salaries don't come from their it comes from lobbyists, like the Podestas, for instance. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Jump in back, Johnny. Just the Jesuit trained Podestas, John and what's his brother's name? John Podesta and his brother Georgetown trained. They have that group, the Podesta group.
Tony Podesta.
Yeah, it just happens to be John Podesta was the guy involved in the PCA stuff. Breitbart died like a few weeks after Trump, which is a lot. But Podesta, his lobby group is one of these groups that's paying millions of dollars to all of these politicians. For instance, do you want to jump in, Johnny?
Yeah, I was just backing up George on how it's clear that the level of corruption follow the money, and they don't really get into the money very much because it shows the corruption. It shows what a joke elections are. I wrote an article, something like the Jesuit in pink or the Jesuit in blue, back for the Hillary Clinton Donald Trump election. And I'm pretty sure that's the article where I have a link that neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump, neither of them paid their taxes. But both of them act like good populists. George, I'm getting a lot of wind off your microphone, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Japanese people pay tax. Actually, there's a famous meme out there where there's a quote that they took a speech from Hitler recently to put the needs of the community before the individual. Hillary said like the exact same thing in like 2007. Like we need to put the needs of the community ahead of the individual. But yeah, you're absolutely right. None of these guys pay taxes. Jeff Bezos pays absolutely no tax. Like I looked into lots of Amazon's money gets laundered in Luxembourg.
I remember that turd, another University of Pennsylvania turd, Warren Buffett, complaining that he pays less taxes than his secretary. Are you kidding me, you disingenuous piece of crap? Complain that you don't pay enough taxes, then donate your billions, you lying piece of crap. It's sickening that whenever you see these political pushes, you see these political pushes by these tyrants and frauds and fascists, that they want to increase the taxes. They're never touched. What they really mean is that they want to further build up the massive wall of separation between the elite, the caviar eating pedophiles, and anyone who has remotely a chance of breaking out of slavery.
Well, look the colony of San Francisco, Johnny. Like what you just said is happening there, literally word for word as you just said. There's like in San Francisco, you can't be middle class really in San Francisco anymore. In the Jesuit fortress of San Francisco, you could the average apartment, like one bedroom, costs like $4,000 a month. You know, for instance, and that's a huge part of this sanctuary city agenda. You know, literally every single the Philadelphia mayor Jim Kenney, Jesuit trained at St. Joseph's. What you can see, he was dancing when Philadelphia became a sanctuary city, really dancing on camera. It seems that through all my research, all the cities that are sanctuary cities have Jesuit trained Catholic mayors, and the states that became sanctuary states have Jesuit trained Catholic governors. Like the first two, Connecticut, Dan Malloy went to Boston College. In California, Jerry Brown, the Jesuit seminarian, went to Santa Clara. But what's this immigration invasion doing? It's also like flooding the workforce with cheaper labor, getting more people like these companies like more there's more and more like temp jobs being created through like job agencies. Illegal workers work for cheaper, and it also makes it harder for Americans to get jobs because they're now competing with all these millions of illegals who have documentation.
Brilliant point. A very important part of this insurgency, this flood of Roman Catholic illegal aliens. A very important part of that is to destroy the economy and further push the economy into chaos. And I can't say any better than what you already said, Eric, is to insulate the elite to further the papal goal of ultimate feudalism, to destroy the middle class. One of the reasons why America is so hated, as it is ridden into the ground by the papacy, is because the Bill of Rights enabled a middle class to be born, enabled nobodies to own property and defend them with arms. And all the pedophile, pervert elites despise that, hate it vehemently, and move with every fiber of their being to destroy it. And they've almost got it done.
Okay, can I chime? By the way, I realize for about the last hour or so we've done a chat fest, but I actually have some things I would like to present, if possible. Do you mind if I
go, George? Go.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard about this on the radio over the weekend. There's an organization called the Center for Immigration Studies. It was formed in 1995. It's supposed to be NDC. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, and they're supposed to do research into U.S. immigration policy. And as I said, it's supposed to be nonpartisan. So since then, Bill Clinton and all the subsequent papal presidential puppets we've had since then have used their findings. Now, turns out that the president of the okay, I'm trying to pull this up. The president of or the executive director of this organization, Center for Immigration Studies, is Mark Kerkorian, who got his JD from Georgetown. And so what they do is they talk to people who are experts on immigration. They talk to Border Patrol. They talk to professors. They talk to economists. They say, hey, how do you think we should? How do you think the president and the national government should gear its policies or steer its policies? Also, I mentioned one of the other members of the board of directors is Patrick McHugh. He writes for their They actually have a national magazine, and as I said, his name is Patrick McHugh. He got his undergrad degree he got his MBA from Marymount University of Maryland. I don't. Oh, okay. Anyhow, that was then you also
George,
have
can you just, what's the name of this organization, the Center for Immigration
well,
Studies?
yes, in DC. It was formed in 1995. You also have okay. Sorry, my computer's slow. Okay, so you have at least half a dozen people on staff. The director, the editor of the magazine, who have some sort of Catholic / Jesuitical background. And so they're forming, now, as I said, this is a private group. However, they make recommendations to the presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, and now Donald Trump. And they said, hey, you know what? Maybe you should grant amnesty, or maybe you should allow, grant amnesty for 5 million people, or you should grant amnesty for 10 million people, or, this is how much money you should spend on ICE or things like that. So I bring this up because you have this group that is having an impact on U.S. domestic policy, and most people have never heard of them. So when Nancy Pelosi or whoever the Speaker of the House happens to be said, well, maybe we should talk about spending more money on border patrols or things like that, or maybe we should, do this or do that. They're being told what to do by people who've been trained by the Jesuits. So
Well,
I just thought
Pelosi is completely gaslighting on getting more money to Border Patrol. She's been one of the fiercest advocates of the sanctuary city model.
yes,
Sanctuary state, bringing as many Roman Catholic illegals into America as possible so they can vote for more Roman Catholic candidates and perpetuate the power of Rome.
Okay, so I'll just mention a couple of the people from this group. Margaret Telford, she's the director of communications for the Center of Immigration Studies. She got her law degree from. She actually got her law degree from Notre Dame. Then you have you have John Miano, who he went to school, got his undergrad degree from Seton Hall, and he got his law degree from. I'm sorry. He went to Seton Hall.
Well, people are Seton Hall is Roman Catholic.
Yes, it's in New Jersey. Okay, let me clarify something. You've had these
I'm sorry, to keep going.
They've either been trained by the Jesuits or Catholic. So you have Jessica Vaughn. Sorry, I don't have any information on her. I guess that was a mistake. So you have Nunez. Yes, yeah, Peter Nunez. He is also Peter Newman is a chairman of the board of directors. He got his undergrad degree from the University of San Diego. So you have at least 5 or 6 people who are in high level positions of this organization who are directing U.S. policy on or influencing U.S. policy on immigration. So now you just mentioned, well, we both just mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Her husband, Paul Pelosi, is on the board of directors for Georgetown. And hello, Johnny, Eric, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
I still got you, George.
No, great information, George. Just with the immigration stuff.
Okay, so now you're talking about sanctuary cities and things like that, places like San Francisco and Philadelphia, PA, and so forth, or sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, and how this has been going on for a long time in America. I was looking, okay, what's going on, right? To get to my next point, I mentioned H. Norman Schwarzkopf a few minutes ago, the general. Something I mentioned to you before is if you're a officer in the U.S. military, and you're almost like a celebrity. You have staff. You have a chief of staff. You have a communications director. You have a head of security. You may have a driver. Things like that. You have a whole entourage of people who are, set your appointments and things like that. And something I mentioned before is that Timothy McVeigh, the alleged Oklahoma City bomber, was Schwarzkopf's personal driver.
Oh, great! And Timothy McVeigh, a member of the hyper anti-Semitic, the Order of Pius Pius X.
Yes. So, and when McVeigh got out of the army, I guess it was like 91, 92, after he received an honorable discharge. And so you'd assume, now, this is a whole nother conversation altogether, but you assume to be a personal driver for a 4-star general, you had to go through a massive background check. And how is it just a few years after he got out of the army, he was allegedly involved with the Oklahoma City bombing?
Well, George, the FBI was just so busy. They're out catching the bad guys. So all these sting operations going around, they didn't have time to look at McVeigh.
George, that's just a coincidence. I'm looking it up now. That's just a coincidence, no matter how statistically impossible that may seem.
And George, I'm going to link this general's name. What was the name of this general again that McVeigh was driving for? I'm going to link it in the chat.
Schwarzkopf, H. Norman Schwarzkopf.
H. Norman Schwarzkopf. Okay.
He's the star of Gulf War I. SCHWARZKOPF.
Okay, I got him here. I'm linking him in the chat. Oh, great information! Holy cow! Timothy McVeigh. The people I know the Order McVeigh was a part of is like a hyper violent anti-Semitic Catholic order.
Yeah, the Society of St. Pius X in.
They're very out there. They're in Kansas, right? But I'm saying they're
St. Mary's, Kansas. St. Mary's, Kansas. And for some reason, the FBI just completely missed all that. For some reason, the FBI completely missed that Timothy McVeigh was part of a radical Roman Catholic domestic terror organization. For some reason, the FBI just missed it and saw no reason to dig any further in it.
And for people to know, this organization is like a Charles Coughlin level of intensive anti-Semitism.
Vehemently so. They're basically Roman Catholic domestic terrorists, and they have their own enclave. They have their own compound there where they train up for their terrorist activities. And nobody knows this. Nobody knows this any more than they know that Bohemian Grove is controlled by the Roman Catholic Knights of Hubertus.
Oh yeah,
These
that's definitely very few people know that. And think about this, like the Knights of Hubertus. It's probably through them that, as George brought up on a few shows ago, that the Sonoma County sheriffs are getting paid by could be directly by the Knights of Hubertus. They're getting paid $175,000 by the Grove to provide security for their rituals, their meetings, at the taxpayer expenses, which is incredible. Like,
yeah. Meanwhile,
awesome.
they're raping and ritually murdering small children at Bohemian Grove, and the taxpayers are paying for the security to let them do that.
Oh, absolutely. It's oh man, like that's a fact that should ignite a fire in the bellies of some people to wanting to get active. Like, you're literally paying for armed security for these guys to like rape kids.
For the pedophile elite. Yep, for the pedophile elite, for the Roman Catholic pedophile elite. And that all just shows you how much of a fraud Bill Hicks, a.k.a. Alex Jones, is, that he would be put on the map for his supposed expose of Bohemian Grove and never, ever mention the Roman Catholic Knights of Hubertus or the statue of St. John of Nepomuc, the Roman Catholic saint, who greets people as they enter the grove with his finger on his lips. Go ahead, George.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Yeah, like St. John of Nepomuc. That was the
Nepomuc. Yeah.
He literally he's doing like kind of, but like I don't know, I've seen people say this is a Gnostic thing, but like it's a secret society. And he's putting this he's doing the shh, like he's putting his finger up.
Yes,
to his mouth,
he's the patron saint of the confessional. He was supposedly martyred because he would not give up the. Meanwhile, the little child raping scum predator priests in the Catholic Church, particularly the Jesuits, own the secrets of the confessional and regularly give them up to their own clergy. But when it came to giving up the secrets of the confessional outside of the clergy, then John of Nepomuc was willing to be put to death. So that he's just absolutely the patron saint. George, I'm getting more of that wind across your microphone. We out there jogging? You riding a bike? What are you doing out there?
Well, I'm trying to multitask. I'm trying to
yeah, find a cove there.
We'll do. So anyhow, you know how we were talking earlier about our history that has disappeared. You know, we were talking about the Huguenot colony in Florida back in the 16th century. Well, here I came across recently another example of an episode that has been basically written out of the history books. Now, we've talked about Alexander Haig before, and he had a brother who's a Catholic, who's a Jesuit, named Francis Haig. Well, turns out that but turns out there was another Frank, 1876 to 1956, and among other things, he was the mayor of Jersey City, New Jersey, from 1917 to 1947.
Oh yeah, this guy was a super Catholic. Yeah, sorry, keep going, George. Yeah, is this Hague spelled Hague?
Yes, like the town in the Netherlands is like the Hague Convention. Well, anyhow, he was noted for several things. He was known as the granddaddy of bosses. Anyhow, it actually says this on his Wikipedia page. Haig was widely known for the reputation of corruption and bossism, and has been called the granddaddy, quote, the granddaddy of Jersey bosses, end quote. As I said, he was the mayor of Jersey City for 30 years, but prior to that, he was a commissioner of public safety. And during his watch, 1916, the year before he became mayor, in July 1916, there was an explosion in what was at the time called Black Tom, later renamed Liberty Harbor. Okay, knock that off. I'm sorry. Sorry, I wasn't talking. Sorry, I'm doing a show. Okay. Sorry. These dogs don't speak. Anyhow, there was an
Keep her friends
explosion
and
in
family
Black.
under control, George.
Oh, okay. We'll do. He was there was an explosion in a place called Black Tom. Something like 200,000 kilograms, or about 900,000 pounds of explosion, one off in the middle of something like 2 o'clock in July the 31st, 19. And fortunately, only 4 people. Fortunate for them. Now it made German saboteurs, and there was immediate calls for America to go to war with Germany because they obviously were responsible for them. As
Hey,
far as I can tell,
go ahead. Go ahead, George. I just want to throw out there real quick. I didn't want to. I want to derail you as you keep working that, but I did want to mention that if you look up Timothy McVeigh, Norman Schwarzkopf's driver on Googlican, that was born on September 27th, which is the birth date of the Jesuit order, nothing comes up. But if you look on alternate search engines, it actually does come up. Mm-hmm. So for some reason, Googlican didn't think it was. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I got this from James. Okay, I got this from James Corbett. I know. Okay, yeah.
The Jesuit in Japan, not to be confused with our James Japan, who does a better job giving the full truth.
I'm saying, did Corbett? Yes. I'm sure. Did he mention that McVeigh was a member of the Order of St. Pius X?
Well, if his video had been longer, I'm sure he would have got to that.
I'm sure he would have. George, you're right. I'm sure he would have eventually gotten to it. It didn't have it. I was pressed for time. He didn't have the time to get to it.
So, I
didn't mean to derail you. Go back to what you're talking about.
Well, I've been derailed so many times. I no longer take the train.
I can't take credit for your
Hague and Jersey, George. Are you still going in?
Well, anyhow, so it basically, in my opinion, it took at least 3 false flags for America to get involved with what is commonly called World War I. Or as Phelps calls it, the initial stage of the Second 30 Years' War.
Good for you. Yeah, Lusitania, the assassination of
Johnny,
Ferdinand.
Right? Lusitania, Johnny. Johnny, just really quickly, sorry to cut you off. Do you know Papal Knight Ed Doheny? He was a knight of the Holy Sepulchre, the chairman of the hit the current company Pex-Mex that used to be Pan American Oil. He had the biggest oil concern in Mexico. The Papal Knight Ed Doheny was on the Lusitania, the last ship voyage before it was sunk, and he was doing business deals on it. That was in his official biography, but I thought that was crazy.
That's a coincidence.
Yeah, this has to be a coincidence, though. sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Johnny.
Hague, George, back to Hague.
Okay, so you had the Lusitania, you had Black Tom. And immediately the papers came out and said, oh, yes, we know it was the Germans who did this. So it was almost like a 9/11 type situation. They immediately knew who the culprits were, but for some reason, that didn't galvanize the public to action. But the coup de grace, if you will, was something called the Zimmermann telegram or cable, named after the German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann. Who lived from 1864 to 1940. Now, I looked into Zimmermann's background. He was evangelical or Lutheran, and he could have been a Freemason, but I haven't found any sort of evidence of that. And he apparently sent a cable to the United States, or actually to Mexico, to the German and to the an official of Mexico, saying that if Mexico would declare war in the United States, Germany would help Mexico recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And turns out the cable now.
That sounds like a Vatican objective. Yeah.
Well, yes. So it turns out that Zimmermann's advisor or handler was a fellow by the name of Roger Casement. who was Irish, who was English, but he was of Irish descent, and he's a devout Roman Catholic. He was also involved with the Easter Monday uprising in 1916, and he was also a homosexual. Now, as I said, Casement, well, even though he was currently an Englishman, he was of an Irish, or at the time an Englishman.
What
He was
was
of
it? What was his first name? Caseman was the
Roger
last name. Roger
Casement,
Caseman. Oh,
C A
Caseman.
S E MENT. So this cable was sent in April 1917, and immediately that was the coup de grace that basically said, all right, the public immediately found out about this. So Germany, not only did they, people were saying, well, not only did they sink the Lusitania a couple years earlier, not only were they probably responsible for this explosion in Black Tom, they're now encouraging Mexico to engage in war with America. So how much more evidence do we need? The United States must declare war against Germany, and Thomas Woodrow Wilson did so. Thomas Woodrow Wilson, the apostate Freemasonic Scottish Rite Presbyterian, 33rd degree Presbyterian, who was advised by Joe Tumulty, a devout Irish Roman Catholic and not a Columbus. Tumulty was his personal secretary while he was president. So, and of course, something I mentioned before. One of the people who Wilson appointed to be his undersecretary of the Navy was a relatively young Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was also happened to be at the commissioning of the USS Arizona in 1916. So he actually broke the bottle of champagne, Arizona.
Oh, fantastic information, George. I linked the Roger Casement wiki page. Absolutely, incredible treason on both sides. Both sides were controlled by the Vatican, but there had to be, treason to get, America officially into the war. Oh, great stuff. And then on the other side, we mentioned with Japan, the leading admiral was literally a Roman Catholic, Yamamoto. And the delayed Jesuit trained at Holy Cross, David Ignatius Walt, moved the Pacific Fleet. Where did he move it from, George? He moved it
from San Diego, California to Hawaii.
To Hawaii, yeah. So that essentially accelerated the militarized situation as well. Even with Pearl Harbor, many of Ed Dohany's oil assets were conveniently not hit in Pearl Harbor. And this is the same Ed Dohany who was on board of the Lusitania right before it crashed.
Oh, great information.
Maple Night. Yeah, George. And I think you mentioned the Easter Rebellion that this what was it? Roger Casement. Yeah, the Casement. He would have been meeting with De La Vera at this time also. If he was involved with the Easter Rising.
Yes.
I'm just seeing that because the De La Vera, the Leo H. Lehman and J.J. Murphy, Dr. James J. Murphy made this. They said De La Vera was a lay Jesuit.
Well,
in disguise, and it makes sense. Like he wasn't even from Ireland. He was born in New York City.
Yes.
Hyper Catholic.
Well, De La Vera, as I said, as you said, he was born in America, and he would later become basically the George Washington of the Irish Republic. He'd go on serve several terms as prime minister and as president, and he's been almost deified in Irish mythology.
Well, absolutely, the personality cult. And Ireland. Well, I don't know. I'd like to see. Oh, sorry, mute my mic by accident. I'd like to think the Irish are waking up to the Catholic Church's malignant influence over there. But that's a country where they've had just overwhelming control.
Well, it's interesting in the Irish Republic in recent years, and you're talking, when I say recent, you're talking like the last 10 or 20 years. Um, I'm not saying, this is a different topic altogether. Church attendance is basically non existent in Ireland. Now, even though it's overwhelmingly Roman or historically Roman Catholic on the order of like 95%, people basically they're not going to Mass. Even traditionally, there people will go to church for a wedding, for baptism, Christmas, Easter, and people aren't doing that anymore. And
Well, I
by the
wonder, do
time,
you think, are they doing that? I wonder, are they doing this because with all the scandals that, like, it was Ireland where they, with the Tuam, Ireland, where they found like the 800 uh,
yeah,
like baby
yes,
skeletons underneath the Catholic facility.
yes, and but it's not just it's not just in Catholic Ireland. It's the same situation in Spain, France, Italy, Portugal. Even though these countries that have been historically Roman Catholic and rapidly Roman Catholic, people just aren't going to. They're just they're walking away from the church, and there's a burgeoning number of people who are saying or who are becoming agnostics, things like that. And I'm not sure. And as we've said on previous shows, or actually, this is actually before Eric joined us, uh, you could say the Jesuits are behind a modern atheist or intellectual atheism. But I'm not sure how that would benefit Rome if people aren't going to Mass.
Yeah, George,
Or no,
it does the same
one.
way.
Oh, sorry,
The,
Johnny, keep
the,
going.
the same way that it benefits them to have Christopher Hitchens or Voltaire working for them. Anyone, the only real threats. Well, no, let me be careful with my words here. Substantial threats to Rome are those who don't have the desire or don't have the fear that puts them under the Pope's authority for their spiritual well-being. So if you derive your your faith from a source outside of the papacy, you are more dangerous than usual for Rome. And that puts born again Christians very high on their list because not only that, but born again Christians see Rome as the used to see Rome as the prophetic antichrist, as the prophetic dragon, the harlot drunk on the blood of the saints, and don't have the desire, don't have the fear. We see this a lot in their puppets. Their puppets are corrupted and coerced into unbelievable crimes and high treason because they fear for their very souls. And the Jesuits would rather have you either believe in the nothingness of atheism or be a slave to the Pope. Either or. They still win in either case. Does that make sense?
Well, I do have, it makes sense to me. And when you look into who are a lot of the big atheist thinkers of the 20th and 19th centuries, the Jesuits do pop up for just one that, like for instance, like in the philosophy class I took at school 3 years ago now, both the philosophers I was studying were atheists and connected to the Jesuits directly. First one was Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher. He wrote the famous book Being and Nothingness. Kind of posited this, existential reality where nothing matters in life. Like life is just a bunch of random events. There's no causation, nothing. But Jean Paul Sartre, I found, went to the Jesuit Lycée Le Grand school in Paris.
Oh
He was
wow.
he was also a communist as well, very active in the communist movement in France. And he was close with Charles de Gaulle as well. Jesuit training. But another one, the other philosopher was Martin Heidegger. I believe Heidegger was also an atheist. He was one of Hitler's philosophers actually in Nazi Germany. But Martin Heidegger actually was a Jesuit seminarian. Literally, he went to the Jesuit seminary at the
Oh wow.
University of Freiburg. He attended for a few years. and apparently he wasn't. Apparently he wasn't sharp enough. Apparently, from what I've seen, to become a Jesuit, so he dropped out of the seminary after 4 or 5 years. But then he became
Wow.
literally became Hitler's like philosopher. He was very anti-Semitic. But Heidegger, I believe, was an atheist. You know, his philosophy was again like there's no meaning to life, like a bunch of series of random events. And
Yeah, so that just fits. It fits perfectly. It fits perfectly. If you do not wish to have the Pope save your soul, then it serves their purposes for you to believe that you have no soul. It serves them. And another one that comes up is Richard Dawkins, who recently made the statement. I think actually made a statement in his one of his books that there's nothing wrong with a little. If you're a child, there's nothing wrong with a total stranger or a teacher giving you a quote mild touching up. So mild there's nothing wrong with mild pedophilia, according to Richard Dawkins, if there is such a thing as mild pedophilia. Another reason why Richard Dawkins is so successful. He defends pedophiles.
Well, you know, he did that debate with who's that? Father Martin. Is that Richard Dawkins?
Yeah. You have an atheist and a Jesuit debate life and aliens and space and all that other stupidity.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Jesuits. They've been doing this for a while in the 20th century. You know, back in 1949, Bertrand Russell, another prominent atheist, debated the Jesuit Copeland, or what was his name? What was the name of? Oh, I'm forgetting the name of the Jesuit. Let me pull this up here. Bertrand Russell debated it was literally identical to what Richard Dawkins just did with Martin. Bertrand Russell debates Jesuit.
Yeah,
And let me pull up. I have quotes from Bertrand Russell's one of his books up here. Okay, Copleston, Frederick Copleston, S.J., a British Jesuit. This guy, Frederick Copleston, was also apparently like a prominent philosopher as well. But this is what Bertrand Russell said here. This is from his book, "The Impact on Science on Society." So, and you know, and they don't. And I've noticed in the science programs they don't tell you about like this literature, but this literature shows like the real intentions of this current like scientific elite that has been established. Bertrand Russell says the subject will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. Anagraxics maintain that snow is black, but no one believed him. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of the home is destructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that the verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. It is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much cost per head to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost to make them believe it is dark gray. So that's him saying like how we're gonna make the kids as stupid as like we keep like.
Yeah, it's nothing more than an experiment in gaslighting, and the debate that you were thinking of was this other astronomer clown Neil deGrasse Tyson, and his comedian co-host Eugene Meerman. Sounds very Jewish to me. Comedian. So we're going to talk about science and astronomy. We're going to have a clown comedian be a co-host. Richard Dawkins. Bill Nye, another atheist clown who worships at the false religion of science, and defending us is the homosexual advocate Jesuit Reverend James Martin, editor of the inversely named America magazine. So that's a debate. that's the Jesuit idea. That's the idea of a debate.
And
that's their idea.
Bill Nye, it's crazy. Have you seen his stuff on like there's like over 15 genders and stuff like that?
He's perfect. He's perfect. And what upsets me is that these clowns have nothing to do with real science, and yet they are allowed to the so-called evangelical Christians that give you the contrary opinion to what these idiots say. What upsets me is this term Scientology. I think it's it's scientism. Scientism. This idea that it's a matter of too much science, which is absolutely patently false. The problem isn't too much science. The problem is false science or pseudoscience. You get these clowns that are about as scientific. You're the one, Eric. You sent, was it you or was it Hawkeye? I think it was Hawkeye. I'm sorry. Hawkeye that sent the press conference of one of the Mars landers, and we had this clown with 50 earrings and this guy that was just an off the walls, like he was on drugs. You're supposed to be a NASA professional, and you're saying the most ridiculous, outlandish things in a press conference about this great NASA victory of a lander on Mars or some ludicrous idea. It's phony science, and that's what upsets me. Is I can't even start the debate because the debate begins on a false premise. The false premise is they are science, and the problem is too much science. That's not the problem at all. The problem is they're frauds, and they're not science. It's phony science.
I was saying too much. Like, it would be good if if there's too much science, 9/11 would have been proved a fraud September 12th, 2001.
Absolutely.
There was enough.
Absolutely.
Science. There's real science going on in the world.
But there isn't. It's a simple matter of observation and deduction from the scientific method, and they don't even obey that. They don't follow that. Great examples, anything from evolution to what we're told about astronomy, none of that obeys the scientific method. You make an observation. You postulate an hypothesis. You attempt to replicate what you observed in an experiment by sterilizing the experiment, getting rid of the variables. If you're able to replicate your observations in an experiment, then there's a high probability your hypothesis is accurate. You then verify that by someone of equal or better learning, a peer review, and if they also follow your experiment and come to the same conclusion, then you have an excellent chance that your hypothesis is correct. None of that is true about astronomy or evolution or these things that are accepted with a white-knuckle death grip as so-called science.
Oh, think about this, Johnny. It's absolutely spot on. Think about this. This is a great example of what you just said with gravity. Like, for instance, I have a letter that Sir Isaac Newton wrote to, let me put Richard Bentley. Richard Bentley, a letter Isaac Newton wrote to him where he literally says that gravity, this is from his own words, I'm quoting from the letter, gravity must be caused by an agent constantly according to certain laws. But whether this agent be material or immaterial is a question I have left to the consideration of my readers. So he doesn't make a definitive statement saying that gravity has a material cause, which they teach, dogmatically, lock, stock, and barrel in the schools today.
It's magic. It's magic. Just accept the experts. Accept what the experts say, Eric. It's magic. You just have to accept it. It's the magic that allows the Earth to spin at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. And yet, if you rise up in a helicopter, the Earth does not spin underneath of you. You're magically held in place by gravity. Same thing with, how it is that the Earth could spin at 1,000 miles per hour, and very, very small insects are not whipped about by the inertial motion. This is the sophistry of the theory of relativity that was fabricated by Papal Court Jew Einstein. One group of so-called experts tells you that you have all this crazy motion, and yet you yourself don't experience, you're not making any observations that this motion is correct or true, and so you have to believe the experts is actually relative to you. You don't see it because it's all relative.
Absolutely, I think, and that explains that's their sophist explanation for why you don't feel any of the gravitational atmospheric pressure, because they say
Right.
it's like 12 pounds per square inch, something. It's pretty significant what it would be. Like flies would, that would resist flies from flying up, and ants, little bugs, as you just said. And this is official. They've admitted, mainstream science has admitted that the force of electricity is like thousands of times stronger than the force of gravity. That I do know that officially. And one thing I do know, and electricity and gravity follow, like they have the same inverse equation systems. Like it's the same, literally the exact same equation. And gravity is a way weaker force than electricity, which I think and science isn't looking into this further. Trained professional scientists, and what people. I think we may have brought this up on a previous show, but going back to Isaac Newton, Isaac Newton never said, as we just read from his letter to Richard Bentley, that gravity has a pure physical cause. Like Newton was a very spiritual guy. He believed in like the ether and the spirit, the spiritual realms, for instance. Like Newton was very religious, so like he never said that gravity has a pure physical cause. But after Newton died, I found that the Jesuits, the Jesuits just happened to reprint his book for the 4th edition.
What a coincidence. They just wanted science, that's all. They just want to be good scientists.
It's like, oh, it's crazy, Johnny, because like in the 4th edition, this literally, like, I confirmed this on a journal article. You can read this on LibGen. Type in Newton Jesuits, or type in, there's a few academic articles that have been written on this, very few. But in the Jesuit edition of Newton's book, it was actually posited that gravity has a physical cause from the physical domain. But you just see, like, Newton didn't say that gravity had a physical cause, but the Jesuits are now saying gravity has a physical cause using Newton's equations. And it's been this gravity, it's become like a key pillar of the brainwashing in schools. Like there's no talk about a possible like electromagnetic universe. Like no talk whatsoever. Like there's been books written, like Augustus Pleasonton, who's a Civil War general who's also a scientist. He wrote a book in 1877 called "The Influence of the Blue Ray of the Sunlight." And in that book, it's on my archive.org page. He dismantles gravity in that book. I think he thoroughly dismantles it. So like it's been, and that was over 150 years ago. So like the greatest thinkers, have been questioning gravity and refuting it for quite some time. So it's unacceptable that it's still parroted as a dogma.
Well, that's a good point, Eric. At no point do teachers in school encourage the kids to conduct experiments on their own to prove or disprove these holy, sacred, accepted rules. You're just supposed to accept what the experts tell you because they are the priests of science. And you cannot question, you cannot conduct experiments yourself to see if there is such a thing as gravity and what are the properties of gravity. You're not allowed to do that. You're not encouraged to do that as a student. You're encouraged to be a good slave and simply accept what the experts tell you. That's the essence of schooling. That's the essence of public schooling, and that's why the Catholic Church secretly owns education.
Oh, absolutely.
They want you to be a slave.
Schools are becoming like police state detention centers. Like some schools actually have like detention lockup rooms now. Kids are being suspended. Like there was a girl who was expelled from her school. I forget what state this was in. She was expelled from her school because she brought a plastic bow and arrow to school. Like I've actually done that before. I brought a plastic bow and arrow to school in grade 9. But this little girl was actually expelled from the school and like sent to a mental hospital, for instance. So like the schools are becoming like super like hyper collectivized, and it's
they love that atmosphere. They'll happily put the metal detectors at the front doors of the schools. They happily have these raids where kids are are strip searched and frisked and taught that they have no
they do it all the time.
personal.
Yeah, they subject them to these SWAT raids. It's crazy.
Yeah, they have no private property. They have no personal space. They have no Fifth Amendment rights. Safety comes first. When you have all these school mass shootings that are real, trust me, they're real. All these mass shootings are real. Therefore, the safety of the other kids is far more important than whether or not your little boy, little girl gets strip searched.
Oh, it shows like they're really going like dumbing down the kids. Like it's going into hyperdrive. Like for instance, through my entire schooling career, I was never recommended a book to read by any teacher or professor.
George, you trying to jump in?
Like, it's a joke, you know what I mean? Like,
it is a joke.
Jump in, George.
Oh, okay. If I can make it. 20 years ago.
You can't make it through. You got to be unbroken. Can't hear you.
Okay. If I can just share a quick anecdote. When I was taking college.
God, you're breaking up, George, but try for your anecdote anyway. Go ahead.
Anthropology course, and I was in the lab, and a group of students, 3 or 4 on evolution. Professor or the instructor said, okay, we have 5 skulls. One is a modern human link that nobody could, because something or another. And, the instructor said, this one is 500,000 years old. This one is 10 million years old, and or whatever. And I said to him point blank, well, excuse me, sir, how do you know that? And he said, what are you talking about? And, well, these came from the University of Chicago. And that's what they said. That's what the pamphlet said that these came with. Well, how do I mean, well, first, they weren't real skulls. They're replications. They were plastic. And I said, okay, so how do I know? And he said that to me. And I said, well, how do I know the skulls on which they're based are supposed to be hundreds of thousands or millions of years old? And how do I different? And he said, well, you could just tell by looking at them, because this one skull here has now granted, this conversation took place about 20 years ago, so I don't remember all the words, but I'm paraphrasing. So he said, well, just look at the brow ridge. Look at how elongated this skull is. Species, a different. And I said, well, a couple of things. Let's just say that's true. Maybe it had a deformity. Maybe it was an accident. Or maybe it was completely, I don't know. I have to take this on your word. I'm taking this on faith that what you're telling me is correct. They said, okay, we need to talk after class. Now, I never told him what my religious views were, that I was a Christian or anything like that. And he said, now I am a Roman Catholic. I am an Italian Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy growing up. And however, my faith I practice on Sundays when I go to the Mass. This is the science class. This is not a religious studies course. Wait a second. Why are you talking about religion? Who brought this up? I never talked about Christianity or the Bible or anything like that. Well, you don't have to. I could just glean that from what you're.
Wow. That fits, George. And my favorite is when they hold out to you a couple of teeth and a finger bone, and they reconstruct an entire civilization. Yes. Or tell you that trust carbon dating. Carbon dating has told them that it's millions and millions of years old.
Yeah. And I said, now, okay, when I have a problem with my car, this was the instructor saying, when I have a problem with my car, I can do one of two things. I could take it to the mechanic to see if he can fix it, or two, I can call on the priest and see if he can exorcise the demons from the engine. Which technique do you think would be more effective? I am a scientist. I deal in facts. I deal in reality. I don't deal in superstition, magic.
Meanwhile, he's absolutely full bold-faced lying, because it's exactly what they deal with. That's exactly our point for this entire conversation, is they want you to shut up and believe their priesthood. Don't do the experiments for yourself. Don't make the observations for yourself. You are not allowed to be your own scientist. You have to obey implicitly, have faith that their high priests are absolutely correct when they tell you things that are in direct inversion to your own personal experiences and to the laws of science and the process of the scientific method itself. That's exactly what they are. They are the priesthood of pseudoscience, and yet they pretend to be the inverse and the opposite.
The thing about this, all these like hard, like you could say like rigid atheists, like spiritual skeptics, scientists who are at the universities, like they're teaching the Big Bang Theory as if it's like as a divine fact, and they don't know. Like I don't know if many of them. I don't know if they're ignorant of this or they're just choosing not to bring it up. But like the Big Bang Theory originates from a Roman Catholic priest. So they're mocking, priests for, their exercising rights, which,
yeah, good for you.
To some extent deserve to be mocked because the exercising rights are ridiculous. But then they get their own ideology comes from the same priests. Like,
absolutely.
And just the Piltdown Man hoax, that was a big, I guess red pill moment for me, seeing that, showing that there is an agenda to.
And of all the people to be involved, but the father of the New Age, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin himself was the fabricator of the. What in the hell do we have a Jesuit priest, number one, being involved in paleontology or archaeology, number two, fabricating a hoax in paleontology, archaeology? Are you kidding me? Does that not tell you absolutely everything you need to know about the fraud of science, number one, and the fraud of the Jesuits, number two? Incredibly educational.
Teilhard was a powerful Jesuit. Also, you mentioned he was the father of the New Age. He was also one of the founders of the UNESCO at the United Nations, which has done a lot of work and the brainwashing that's going on with the schools all over the world, creating a quote unquote a liberal culture at the schools.
I love it when the papists pretend that Teilhard was some kind of renegade that worked against his order and was banished. Meanwhile, nothing of any consequence was done to him. He could have been thrown out of his order. But at no point did he receive any coercive action. He was moved around, and we're told that those were actually punishments. As when he was moved from one country, whatever.
No, I agree. I saw Abra Manhattan wrote that in the. I was a little disappointed just in the Washington-Moscow Vatican alliance. He mentioned just really briefly how Teilhard Chardin was punished by the Catholic Church for his out there theories.
I was disappointed in the entirety of the Washington-Moscow Vatican alliance because he accepted the premise that the Cold War was legitimate, that the Cold War was not. He didn't even get into whether or not the Cold War was needlessly fabricated, which it absolutely was. Yes, the dangers of the Cold War to the average person, yes, those are legitimate, but the forces behind the Cold War were all needlessly contrived, and they all trace back to Rome, what was supposedly Manhattan was spending all of his time outing. How could you not go any further and see Rome was behind communism?
Oh, I know. And just like we mentioned earlier, so Dervinsky, the first, the chief of the Cheka police of the Soviets, was a Polish Roman Catholic, wanted to become a Jesuit priest. Like Avro, he mentions that Stalin went to a Jesuit school even. So Avro, I'm sure he was aware of the full facts. I'm sure he was aware Lenin, built the monument to Sir Thomas More at the Soviet Union. And yeah, and with this was huge. This to me proves the Jesuit nature of the Cold War was the Francis Gary Powers U-2 spy plane downing incident, which was literally just a psyop to keep the Cold War going, because there was talks about that right around that time of disarmament, so they needed to send this U-2 spy plane over to get it easily detected in Russian airspace, and then the Jesuits sent James Donovan, of all people, trained at Jesuit Fordham, a former OSS soldier. They literally sent a Jesuit-trained James Donovan over to get Francis Powers from the Soviets. But that kept the ideological Cold War going for another 15 years when it was starting to fizzle down.
Yeah, it's also said that one of the ways that Lee Oswald was allowed to get so close to the circles, and his wife, what's her name, Marina, was like the niece or the daughter of a general in military intelligence. And one of the reasons why he was allowed to get so close is because he appeared giving the with the secrets of how to shoot down a U-2. He handed the Soviets the secrets on how to shoot down a U-2 spy plane.
Oh, fantastic information! Yeah, but Oswald. That was just another thing. Avro. Like I would say the book. I would recommend the book Washington, Moscow, Vatican Alliance, because there's some. It shows the open relationship, at least not the covert relationship, but the open relationship between the Catholics and the communists post World War II. And he goes into a bit how, for instance, how Charles de Gaulle didn't persecute any of the Catholic clergy who participated in the Nazi Vichy regime as he promised. So there was some, there was some valuable information in there, for instance. But yeah, he didn't take it to the level, like he could have mentioned Oswald, for instance, how Oswald was very influenced by the Soviet Union. And even that was the talk he gave when he spoke at the Jesuit College a few months before Kennedy was killed at Spring Hill College.
I absolutely will continue to recommend his work. We just have to, we don't check our brains at the door for anything. It makes us who we are. We're about a skeptical understanding of truth. Names, places, and dates. We provide all this material for anyone else, and encourage them to think for themselves and draw their own conclusions. And as long as we're doing that, we're going to come up and have some questions about some of these people that have such solid work on exposing the Vatican. It's, it could be anything from just missed it, didn't obey their own disciplines and how to follow the evidence, or that they themselves are also gatekeepers. Anything is possible. You can only judge.
I love Avro Manhattan's books. But it is a reality that it's on his tombstone. Like he was a Knight of the Order of Savoy, and I think he was made a Knight of Malta as well.
Right. Yes, so, he was a Knight of Malta. Yeah.
Like he, in terms of like, I've never seen usually like a Knight of Malta give out as good information as him, but I don't know. It is undeniable that he was a Knight of Malta. And he openly writes about it. Like he in the Washington Moscow book, he writes about how he met. He calls him Vladimir. Like he was meeting with a KGB agent in England, for instance. He talks about how he was meeting. He had a dinner with Eduardo Frei, the president of Chile. He was president of Chile from '64 to '68. The same Eduardo Frei was given. The CIA gave $10 million to this Jesuit priest Roger Vecamans, S.J., to give And then the Jesuit
Wow.
recommends SJ use the money to give it to Frey, for instance. I've seen that on a few sources. So, but like I'm saying, so Avro did have some powerful friends. So I think now I advertise him as like an insider. Who,
Yeah, he was obviously very plugged in. Um, we just have to examine his information and view it critically.
well, absolutely, and it's still very good. But I think I think personally he knew a lot more than he disclosed. Still disclosed good stuff. But
Yeah, look
I
that.
think he was aware of the specific Jesuit nature of the Vatican intrigue, because he does mention, in the Vatican and world politics, he says stuff like it's like in Spain, it's always the Jesuits who seem to be involved in the political movements, for instance. Like in labor parties, and the Jesuits are behind the Catholic action all the time, as he showed throughout the book. So I think I think he was aware of the full Jesuitical nature. And this is going
I
to
don't.
the Illuminati as well. Like I bet he knew about Weishaupt, for instance.
I don't think he would have been able to have been published. I don't think he would have been such a prolific writer if he didn't hold back on some truth, on some material. I think that may have been the key to how it is we're talking about him right now.
No, I
He had to.
think that's a good point. I think that's it definitely would have been tougher if he well, it's just harder in nature. Like yeah, I think that's a great point. Because
If they give the.
if you're publishing a book like on the tying the Jesuits to the Illuminati, to communism, to the Fabian socialists. Like for instance, like one of Avro was he was friends with George Bernard Shaw, I'm pretty sure. And George Bernard Shaw actually said that the Fabian socialists, he wanted them to be the Jesuits of socialism, for instance. But you're absolutely right. It would have been, like impossible for a book like that to have been published. And I think Avro, for me, he was one of the first guys that gave me my red pill understanding of Vatican intrigue. And just like as a reason, you can't expect one person to give you all the answers either. So you take what you get and you build off that information and do further research.
Well, we try to. We try to give the full, complete truth, but
we try our best. But it's impossible.
And we're not.
Everything at once.
And we're not nearly as well known as Avro Manhattan. So I think that kind of shows you the paradigm. George, you're trying to jump in. That shows you the paradigm, the scale. As I've said in my shows in the past, there's a scale of truth versus psyop, and it's the absolute inverse of that person's success. On the far end of the scales, you have mainstream news, and you have no truth there whatsoever. And just a little bit to the right of mainstream news, you got somebody. You may have like Fox News or the so-called conservatard talking heads. You get a tiny little bit of truth with the right-wing values. And then beyond,
I know Tucker Carlson says some good things the odd time.
Every once in a while, and then beyond them, you've got somebody like Alex Jones, who gives a little bit more truth than Fox News, but not much. And then on the beyond them, you might get somebody like Avro Manhattan or Eric John Phelps, and yet they're still holding back. And for somebody like Eric Phelps, you're actually having overt disinfo as well with his racism and Jesuit eschatology. He's supposedly a hyper devout Baptist Calvinist white supremacist.
Well, actually, Johnny with Phelps, I haven't thought about this. I know we talked about the what showed me he was a gatekeeper holding back was on George Washington. But does Phelps even acknowledge that Washington ghostwrote his rules of civility from the Jesuits? Like the Washington Post even admits it. Like the New York Times admits it. It's in like all the encyclopedias. Like I wonder if Phelps. To me, that seems.
Yeah, no, good for you. Good for you. No, none of and something else. A big criticism of Phelps is he completely ignores the Carroll dynasty. The Carroll dynasty was part and parcel to the American Revolution. Phelps completely avoids
Oh, I'm sure Phelps.
the
Yeah,
carols.
that quote from it was Appleton's Encyclopedia of the American Revolution, like biographies of the characters involved. But they said no greater power. This was in 1887, Volume 1. But it was written in the Appleton Encyclopedia that no greater power existed in the United States than the union of the Jesuits and the Carols in the person of John Carroll. So I'm sure Phelps, Phelps is extremely well read. I'm sure he's aware of that.
Yeah, the
He
Roman
knows the
Catholic
history.
Freemason, who designed Washington D.C. George, what was his name?
Oh, I'm going. Not Chiaparelli.
Charles L'Enfant.
L'Enfant, good for you. I think it was like Pierre Charles. I think it was his full name, Pierre Charles L'Enfant. You know what got L'Enfant fired by Washington? He plowed over one of the Carroll homes. That's what got L'Enfant fired. He would dare to plow over one of the Carroll homes in order to finish his design. And probably because there was some kind of bad blood there as well.
And that's the real. But like, what's the Phelps says that L'Enfant was fired by Washington.
It doesn't even mention it. Yeah, it's you know what, Phelps, complete liar, absolute liar. I don't remember if he told me this in person or if I heard it. I'm pretty sure he told me this in person, and I wrote it down in my notebook. He lied to me, bold-faced lie, and said that L'Enfant was fired because Washington realized that the new capital was too much like Rome. Absolute bold-faced lie, which it is, but that's not the reason. In fact, so-called Washington, D.C., is so much like Rome. It used to be called Little Rome on the Potomac.
Absolutely, and it's in the first mayor of Washington. It backs up what you just said with Robert Brent. I've never heard Phelps bring up this either, or Avro Manhattan. Even Joseph McCabe. Joseph McCabe actually in his book on the Jesuits briefly mentions how John Carroll had a very interesting role to play in the founding of America. But the mayor, I haven't heard those guys mentioned. This guy is like rarely mentioned by at all. But Robert Brent was the first mayor of Washington D.C. and he was like a papist. He was actually the nephew of John Carroll, and he was the first official mayor of the city. I guess it was known as just Washington. It was before the D.C. But in Washington, the Jesuit priest William Matthews. They had a Jesuit priest create the public school system and the public library system in Washington. For instance, yeah, and just
why am I not surprised?
And with Washington, I put this in the Dollar in the Vatican preface for Avro's book, that the reprint that Greg put together, but you can read this letter on the internet. Like George Washington, Don Diego de Gardaquí was the Roman Catholic Spanish ambassador to the United States, and I put a blog post together on him. Like John Carroll, I found a quote of John Carroll saying Diego de Gardaquí is like an excellent man. He's been very useful. Paraphrasing something along those lines, but Diego de Gardaquí, like his banking house was actually one of the key financial agents of the American Revolutionary Army. But I found that Diego de Gardaquí gave George Washington a personal Spanish edition of Don Quixote, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Don Quixote?
Dan Quixote. Oh, Quixote?
Yeah. It's got a ridiculous spelling. It's part of the tricks, language tricks that they use. Whatever it's Quixxt, whatever. It's supposed to be. You just pronounce it Don Quixote. And by the way, Don Quixote is known as a metaphor and a euphemism for Ignatius of Loyola. So whenever you hear Don Quixote, it's actually code for the Jesuits.
Yes. Holy cow, yeah. So Washington was given the copy of the Don Quixote book, the analogy of the Jesuits. Holy cow. Yeah, so it just shows that Washington, and Alberto Rivera even says this, to his credit. He says the first contact the Jesuits made with America was with George Washington.
Yeah, I really think that Alberto was absolutely legit in everything that he claimed. I don't know of any place where I discovered something that I would have expected him to have talked about, and he didn't. It's possible, but I'm not aware of being disappointed by information.
Alberto was one of the only guys I've seen that made the accusation that Jim Jones was a Jesuit.
Oh yeah,
I haven't seen that really anywhere else. Like any author. Well, actually, the Executive Intelligence Review, in an article that I put on my page, I'll find it and link that in the chat before we get going here. But the Executive Intelligence Review said that there's enough evidence out there to establish the fact that Jonestown was a Jesuit operation done by Georgetown trained officials in the State Department. That's what the ERI said. But Alberto said full out that Jim Jones is a Jesuit. I haven't seen that anywhere else.
yeah. Now, George, the EIR is the publication of Lyndon LaDouche, Mr.
LaRouche, yeah, he's a distant
Mr. It's the Limeys. But like Alex Jones, every once in a while, I mean, Lyndon LaDouche has a large number of researchers and authors and writers, and a lot of times you'll get some interesting truths out of the Infowars blogs from other from some of the.
Yeah, I agree. There's one. There's an article on the. You can get this for. I put this on my archive.org, but you can get this PDF if you just type it in. There's an article done in the EIR called "Fidel Castro: How a Jesuit Asset is Manufactured."
Yeah, I have. I cite the Executive Intelligence Review several times, George. But ultimately, they just want that nut Lyndon LaDouche to blame the Britons for everything. George, you trying to jump in?
Yes, a couple things I wanted to say. Two things. Well, first is you're talking about Alberto Rivera, and there was a video of him.
Your tongue was dyslexic there. Your tongue was dyslexic. Keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have lexgraphia.
Keep going.
I'm sorry, Alberto Rivera. He mentioned one of the videos from the 1980s that the Jesuits reached out to Ronald Reagan as early as 1940, and he was saying, yes, when he did that film about your football, and he said, oh, you're talking about Newt Rockne, All-American? Yes. Somebody's interviewing him. And he said, even though Reagan wasn't even 30 years old, we knew that he had a bright political future ahead of him because he was young, he was handsome, he was articulate. He had a good sense of humor. We knew that even though he was just a journeyman B-rate actor, he had a bright future ahead of him. We were grooming him as early as 1940 to go into politics. First as governor of California in 1967, and ultimately in the White House. And he says specifically as early as 1940, they wanted to use Reagan to establish diplomatic relations with the Vatican, but that's a different topic altogether. Something I wanted to tie up a couple of loose ends: gatekeepers and pseudoscience. Now, as I said on our previous show, I just finished the Annie Jacobson tome, Paperclip, and it's basically gatekeeping 101.
George, did we lose you?
Oh, yeah, I think you lagged out there a bit, George.
Hello.
All right, so Paperclip, Gatekeeping 101 is the last thing we heard from you.
Oh, I think were you talking about the Annie Jacobson book, George?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Like we can now, yeah.
Okay.
We lost you.
Pulling up a file. Well, anyhow, so just out of curiosity, I said, even though it was almost a complete waste of time, because some real research, yes, you can go to old-fashioned print books, but good information, you have to look at the index. Whom do they cite as their what organization, things like that. And in the index, one of the first names you come across is Otto Ambrose. I had never heard of him before. I imagine most people had not either. You could see he was like the Wernher von Braun of chemicals.
Yeah, actually, I wrote about him a bit. I put a little excerpt on him in the Dollar in the Vatican preface. He was chief IG Farben chemist, became an advisor, or he was recruited by Knight of Malta J. Peter Grace to join W.R. Grace Co.
Yes, well, not only that, but he's Dow Chemical. Ambrose lived from 1990. He was arrested and was tried at Nuremberg, but he was acquitted. Even though there were, literally tons of documents, thousands of papers he did at Auschwitz. He worked at Auschwitz III, Auschwitz, experimented on thousands of people. And he wrote down meticulously, he and his records, they wrote down their name, height, their hair and eye color, where they're from, any sort of irregular, if they had any broken, if so, which one, sort of deformity. Anyhow, Ambrose undergrad degree from the University of Munich, which is like the University of San Francisco or Boston College, sounds purely secular. Among other, Joseph Raz, professor there, aka.
Well, actually, George, is that Jesuit? Because I know there's a Jesuit school in Munich, but it might be like a seminary or a theological school.
Speaking, now, Maximilian Universität von München. I say that 10 times fast. It is a public research university located in Munich. Now, as I said, it is publicly funded. However, it has history. It says here the Jesuits actually ran the school from 1549 to 1573, and it became one of the bastions of the counter. As a matter of fact, Peter Canisius was one of the rectors. 19th century, it became the legend. So, it's just in Vienna. It was Jesuits took over. Then it became a secular school again.
Well, George, the secular school gave a Nobel laureate to Pope Benedict XVI, Ratzinger.
Yes. So it's about okay, but Jacobson did not mention this in her book. She did not talk about the fact, the history of the University of Munich. She also didn't mention the fact that he also served Ambrose as an advisor to our Adrian, the Chancellor of West.
Konrad Adenauer?
Konrad Adenauer, yes, I'm being dyslexic.
Yeah, actually, and the people aren't aware, he was like as much of a papist as one could be. Like, he went to mass like every day while being West Chancellor. While being Chancellor, he was a Knight of Malta. This order is not in existence anymore. But have you guys seen the Supreme Order of Christ? I
have not. No.
That used to be the highest papal order, and actually, Nicholas Frederick Brady was a Supreme Order of Christ, the guy who gave the Jesuits like $2 million to build their. The financier gave the Jesuits $2 million to build their novitiate in Wernersville. But they actually discontinued this knighthood, I think, in the 60s or the 70s. But Adenauer was a member of it, and it was the highest knighthood in the Catholic Church. Like, this guy was the Pope, might as well have been in charge of West Germany.
Wow.
And that's why, though, Reinhard Gehlen also ascended to the ranks as fast as he did. He was enabled by the papist Adenauer, and like Galen was a Knight of Malta, like Adenauer. And I didn't mean to cut you off to jump back in, but George talked to me, Johnny, how Jacobson. He told me how Jacobson failed to admit that Galen was even made a Knight of Malta, and that's everywhere. Like that's in like that's in Charles Hyde.
Well,
That's everywhere. Like that's,
she wanted to get published. She wanted to get published. That's how you get published.
no, I agree because like there's no excuse. Like I was telling I don't know if you've gone through this book, Johnny, but I sent you and the team the American Swastika book by Charles Hyham, and I'm sure that. And just I told George to read that book. That was written in 1985 after he read Jacobson's book, and I just bet that book written 30 years ago exposes so much more stuff because Hyham I think did reserve some or kept some punches in. I think he did hold back a bit, but there's tons of information on the Vatican in that book. Charles Coughlin's relation to the Nazis, William Donovan's connection to the Vatican, Galen's connection to the Vatican, for instance. So there's Jacobson, knows of these books that have been written. She has all these resources at her disposal. It's sad to see. Make it and go full circle. Like the shills, like Mark Passio, Johnny, and George are promoting Annie Jacobson's book. I confirm that.
I think what upsets me about these people, I think what upsets me about these people, guys, is that they make a living at supposedly giving us secret information. And yet they're frauds. They purposefully, for their own safety and aggrandizement, withhold the most important stuff that we need to know. So their very foundation of what they're doing is deception. And yet they're supposedly out there trying to give us secret information, George.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, and George mentioned to me, Johnny, how the Catholic Intelligence Agency has their own review of the Annie Jacobson book on their website, where they praise the book even.
I'm not surprised.
It's the Catholic Intelligence Agency, so there you go. I think that tells you everything you need to know.
George, finish up and we'll close out.
The Catholic Intelligence Agency suppresses truth. That's what happened to Gary Webb. I think I've heard you this, Johnny, and it's a great point. If you heard, you said this on a previous show, but where is the follow-up story to the Gary Webb revelations? So you see how quickly the CIA can stomp out journalists.
Absolutely.
No New York Times follow-up, no Washington Post follow-up, no Chicago Tribune follow-up.
That was the San Jose Mercury News. The San Jose Mercury News. And all they did was get out a couple of his stories. And after he got depressed and shot himself in the face twice, everyone disappeared. Apparently, he was right. The CIA only trafficked drugs for just a short period of time. And even though it was incredibly successful and lucrative for them, they stopped doing it for no particular reason. Just trust me.
Yeah, because they have the incentive to stop when you're making billions of dollars. You're just going to want to stop making billions of dollars, right? You have the incentive to make it's ridiculous. Like they're making all this money. Like why would they stop? And actually, with the Washington Post, they actually recently they did a story slamming Gary Webb. I think it came out in like 2016 or 2017. And this was the Washington Post is literally they're in a $600 million deal with the CIA. I mean, you can read about it on the Business Insider. Not a lot of people.
Oh yeah, they are the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes are outlets for the Catholic Intelligence Agency.
Oh, absolutely, and we saw that big time with the RussiaGate. How many countless gaslit articles saying, an anonymous source tells us that Trump's phone was tapped. There's text messages saying that, revealing how he's Putin's puppet, or just ridiculous stuff like that. There's always an anonymous general is telling us that the smoking gun is in. You guys probably got places to be, but I thought it was interesting with Amazon that Jeff Bezos, the whole Bezos empire, and they own the Washington Post and some other things. But they gave out $15 million to the Catholic Church in 2017, I believe. 25 million, I believe. I think it was 25 million. They gave out to quote Catholic charities. Jeff Bezos gave out, and this was after he got into a deal with the CIA, the Catholic Intelligence Agency. I've seen photos of the Catholic James Mattis. Bezos gave Mattis like a private tour of the Amazon facility.
What a surprise!
That
makes perfect sense. Why would the Secretary of War need to get a private tour of Amazon? Well, it's important to his duties there.
Well, serving making sure there's no ISIS threats that can get at Amazon's infrastructure.
Yeah.
And actually, the ISIS, the Jesuits are taking the ISIS threat to it this extreme. Like Sheriff David Clark, the Jesuit trained at Marquette University High School. He's the Fox News sheriff. He's like the TV sheriff. He's the black guy in the cowboy hat. He's always saying like blue lives matter. We need more.
Yeah, that freaking guy.
More police state. But he literally said, I think in 2015, he has his own radio show, and he was given a position within Homeland Security, just like Michael Nutter, the former Jesuit-trained governor of Philadelphia. He's also currently in Homeland Security, which I thought was interesting. But David Clark in 2015, he said that we need to round up 1 million Americans and throw them and suspend habeas corpus, throw them in military detainment centers because there's like 1 million ISIS sympathizers in America.
Yeah.
Just out there stuff.
Sure.
But all this they're using outlandish stuff. Blowing the ISIS threat completely out of proportion to usher in a police state. Like in the movie Do Not Resist, you see the Richland, South Carolina County Sheriff's Department training, their SWAT team training, and you see like how they train, and you're just like, damn, like something's off. Like they're training like death squad. But you see, like they talk to the head sheriff, like in the movie, and he says, "Yeah, we're looking out for ISIS threats here." I'm like, what? Like, what the fuck? Like you're in like rural South Carolina. What, are you kidding me? You're looking out for ISIS threats in rural South Carolina. This is the reason we're giving the cops like MRAPs and Bearcats and M4s and AR-15s to get ISIS in rural South Carolina. Like it's outrageous. And I know in one town, I think this was in Massachusetts. Like the one town actually had to pay like $40,000 because the MRAPs were destroying the roads on the town because the MRAPs are so big. The streets aren't designed for them. So like what benefit are we getting from this? Like, you know what I mean?
And once again, the taxpayers pay. George, round us out here.
Round us out. Boy, how do I do that? So I guess while joining us, this is like, hope we can have you back on a regular basis. And, well, something I was just is something that Eric had mentioned to me a few months ago, or 7, some with at least a 4-year did not Roosevelt was. So if 1 out of 4 people with a college degree in America didn't know who FDR was, how many can articulate what in? And so we're being, we're being dumbed down. We're being dumbed down. You're talking about this earlier. We're being taught, and we're just supposed to blindly accept anything. That, of course, we're supposed to accept that the 9/11 was carried out by roughly 19 Saudi terrorists who hated America, hated our freedom, and they crashed those planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And Osama bin Laden was the architect of this because at America are supportive Israel, the U.S. government supported. We're supposed to accept that. We're supposed to accept the moon landing in 1960. The fact we're supposed to accept for allegedly a globe and things like that.
Well, the Gulf. We accept the Gulf of Tonkin to get into Vietnam. We accept. We don't talk about how Saddam Hussein was completely propped up by the Catholic intelligence agency before we turned on him in 2001. We armed Saddam Hussein, put him into power. Same thing with ISIS. ISIS guns come from America, Russia, and China. Al Qaeda's weapons mostly from America. It's a whitewash on all fronts.
Well, of course, and you had a window of opportunity. 15 years in the earlier part. It was a little bit easier to disseminate information when YouTube was basically the Wild West. Any idea, any hypothesis, regardless absurd it may have sounded. But now, in recent years, so-called hate speech and white nationalism or white supremacy, they need to clamp down on that. And social media of third rail, you cannot even question. School shootings or our cosmology.
Well, it's getting to this point that if you question a school shooting in a school, they'll lock you in a mental hospital.
Yes.
It's already at that point. And actually, this will be my. I know because you guys, it's getting. We've been a bit over for 2.5 hours, but I guess my last point is with I'll finish off with this. With all this police protection, the MRAPs and the putting the cops in the schools, that the over militarized policing, and the dialectic of using white nationalists to as an excuse for more invasive police state measures. Also, I think a big part of the white nationalist agenda is they're using that cunningly as a dialectic to say if you're against our Jesuit sanctuary city model, you are therefore a white nationalist bigot. I think that's what they're doing.
That shuts people up pretty quick.
The treason is all over the place. In San Antonio, Texas, William McManus, Catholic police chief there, released 12 undocumented illegals directly into a Catholic shelter. This was weeks after Texas just passed a bill against sanctuary cities.
Wow.
So the treason is bold right in the open, and I think that they're using this white nationalist dialectic against all opposition to the invasion of the Roman Catholics coming across the border are going to be hate-filled, just racists. They're going to they're calling people affiliating people with the KKK who just because they're speaking out against illegal immigration, let alone not legal immigration, but they're speaking out against illegal immigration, and they're comparing people like the KKK and white supremacists and stuff like that. And so you can see it's a Jesuit dialectic on both sides. You have the Jesuit mayors, Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans, literally went to Jesuit high school, Loyola, Catholic University of America, and a professor. He's one of the biggest advocates of sanctuary states. For instance, that's just one example. All the biggest advocates of sanctuary states, when you look into them, 90% of them I found are Jesuit trained Roman Catholics. Jerry Brown, for instance. Classic example. Literally was going to become a Jesuit seminarian, and look how when you have a Jesuit seminarian in power for 30 years, look what's happened to California. It's crazy. It's tent cities everywhere. The wealth inequality is so extreme. I've been watching some documentaries just on the San Francisco housing market, and if you're making $150,000 a year, you can't get a place. People are spending 3/4 of their rent, 3/4 of their income on rent, for instance. So you can see the failed experiment of the sanctuary city model. But I guess I'll sum up there if you guys want to jump in.
Oh yes, and I know we'll get to Johnny in just. California officially became a sanctuary year, 2018. The town of Santa Rosa, Cirucci.
Oh, you're cutting in a little bit, in and out a bit there, George.
Sorry about that. Or Colorado. And now Cirucci is not the mayor of Santa Rosa this year. But yeah, that's just a further just saying a moment ago about
Wait,
how
did you say that the mayor of Santa Rosa went to Regis in Denver?
yes.
Oh, and they became a sanctuary city?
Yes.
Okay, bingo, ding, 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 ding. Like, okay,
Yep.
literally, the professor, the mayor of Philadelphia, Jim Kenney, literally danced when Philadelphia became a sanctuary city, and he was like, "There's actually a case in Philadelphia where an undocumented immigrant or an illegal immigrant killed this like young girl after like ICE had him detained, and the mayor forced ICE to release him." And then actually, this is ultimately what I wanted to mention when I was wrapping up. I think the big agenda right now by the Jesuit mayors and the Jesuit governors pushing sanctuary cities is to make ICE look like the most like evil, heinous. Like they're gonna be, oh, Donald Trump and ICE, like how evil of them, like separating families. How could they do this? Like this is like, what I mean? Like I think that's part of it. They're building up this crazy sympathy for the immigrants by demonizing ICE to like these crazy levels. Like ICE is like ICE is like the devil basically. Oh, like, ICE is just out here trying to get like these poor, innocent, women and children and stuff like that. That's how they're branding. I mean, ultimately,
They don't even do their job now. They don't even do their job now, but they're going to go ahead and demonize them and make sure that there's no hope for them to ever do their job.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's they're just gonna like bury it because even now, like they have to release like 95% of everyone they detain.
Which they do. And there should be criminal proceedings when they release a criminal and the criminal goes out and rapes and kills. The authorities that release them should be the ones also being prosecuted, and they're not. The authorities that release the criminals should be prosecuted.
Oh, absolutely. Like Jim Kenney in Philadelphia, like he's just an example of an in-your-face like papist, like traitor, like I'm not serving like America whatsoever, like. And you see that like when he's literally like dancing when they became a sanctuary city. I'm still just kind of shocked of like I only saw the footage of it last night. I just couldn't believe it because like the Jesuit treason is right in your face, and none of the commenters I saw who brought this up mentioned that Jim Kenney was hyper devout Catholic and trained by the Jesuits. No one on the mainstream media seems to make that connection. Like Tucker Carlson does segment after segment on the crisis at the border and why are all these illegals coming over. But I haven't heard him once make the point that all these illegals are Roman Catholic, and he never will because he works for Knight of St. Gregory Rupert Murdoch, who said News Corp is just like the Jesuits. Yeah, I'll mute my mic here and let you guys summarize your final thoughts.
No, we can go ahead and close out, George. I'm good. Thanks. Good job. Let's do this again real soon.
Okay.
No, definitely. Do you guys do you have anything, George? Before we sign off.
Well, yes, it happened almost four years ago, back when Jorge was when he spoke to his subjects at the. Now, I'd imagine speech, which is less than an hour long, covered, one of which was I need to do more. You need to get rid of capital. All we need to do more for refugees. We need to open up our arms wider to be more inclusive.
Actually, have you guys seen Jesuit Refugee Service? They openly flaunt their plans on their website. I just wanted to mention that quick. Here, keep going, George.
Okay, so translation just before state in 2017, I think 16, shortly thereafter, and sanctuary cities in America and in Toronto is a sanctuary city.
Well, I bet that was the Jesuit presence at the University of Toronto. I bet helped that come together. I'm gonna look into more of the Toronto becoming a sanctuary city, because it's every city I've looked into, the mayor is Jesuit. Like Cincinnati, Cincinnati is a quote unofficial sanctuary city, but the mayor John Cranley went to Xavier High School Jesuit and Jesuit John Carroll. For instance, New Orleans was another quote unofficial sanctuary city. Mitch Landrieu went to Jesuit High School, Loyola, and the Catholic University of America. I don't believe the current mayor of Toronto is Catholic. What is it? I think his last name's Brown.
Well,
John Tory. I don't think he's a Catholic, but he's controlled by the Catholic Church. No, keep going, George. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Okay, I'll have to look more into Toronto, but what Jorge did for almost 4 years ago is he's giving out a blueprint about what he wants to happen in the United States in the immediate future. And it's something you pointed out in one of your videos last year, and it sounded like a John Boner, who was he was crying when Jorge was giving his.
Oh yeah, he was he was tearing up literally in the background.
Well, it was on the show last year. Most people don't know that Jorge actually had chili for lunch that day, so it was so Boner's reaction was completely understandable. So I guess Joe Biden, who was vice president at the time, I guess he's orthodoxly challenged. So anyhow, so I just felt compelled to stick up. I'm sorry, for John Boner. So on that note,
John Boner is now on the board of Reynolds American, like the biggest cigarette company in the States.
Well, and
I think that's his post-political, and I think he's a lobbyist now too. I think he's getting into that side of the game.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah. I imagine a lot of the viewers watching this have seen that speech of the Jesuit Pope Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis at the U.S. House in 2015, but they haven't. They should watch it. You see, Boner was tearing up behind him, and Pope Francis says we need to come together for the world community. Also, aka New World Order. That's what that means. And the Trilateral Commission, groups like them openly advocate. Like the Trilateral Commission, when it was created by Jesuit-educated Zbigniew Brzezinski, openly advocated that it wanted to create a new world economic order. Actually, and the Pope's recent encyclical Laudato Si, there was a lot of we need to come together for the Pope was saying we need to stiffer international laws, international unity, cooperation, blah blah blah. They're just masking the globalization and a one world government. Because the Jesuits are the most internationally scoped order in the world. The Jesuits are a true international order. Many Jesuits are 10 plus languages. They got novitiates, schools all over the world. They have they have Jesuit trained politicians all over the world, Jesuit trained lawyers all over the world. So no one has as much influence as them.
I think it's a great place to stop, guys. I'm gonna get going. Great stream, fantastic stream.
Yeah, great stream, guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'm sure we'll do another one sometime soon.
Stand by. I'll look forward to it, guys. Take care.
Take care. All right, we're stopping.